The doctor's hands were shaking when he pulled the ultrasound wand away from my wife's belly. I noticed it because I noticed things. 41 years selling commercial insurance in Columbus, Ohio, will do that to a man. You learn to read the small tells, the pause before a lie, the way a hand drifts to a collar when somebody's about to dodge a question. And Dr. A's, a calm, soft-spoken man I'd liked from the first appointment, was suddenly not calm at all. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "could you step out into the hall with me for a moment?" My wife Diane sat up on the table and laughed that bright little laugh of hers. "What's the secret, boy or girl?" "Just routine," he said, smiling at her, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Paperwork. I'll have your husband back in 2 minutes." I was 63 years old, married to Diane for 5 years, and about to become a father for the first time in my life. I buried that dream a long time ago, somewhere around the time my first wife passed. So when Diane told me she was pregnant, I cried in the parking lot of a CVS like a fool. I'd been floating for months. I would have followed that doctor anywhere. He walked me down the corridor, past the nurse's station, around a corner where nobody could hear us. And then he stopped and looked at me with an expression I'd never forget. "You need to leave her," he said. "Today, if you can. Get a lawyer. File for divorce. Get out of that house." I actually laughed. It came out as more of a cough. "I'm sorry, what? I can't explain everything right now. I shouldn't be saying any of this, but I've been a physician for 26 years and there are things I can't unsee." He glanced over his shoulder. "When you get home, I need you to look at something. The medication she's been giving you, whatever it is, bring it to me. And until you do, don't take another dose, not one." "How do you know I'm taking anything?" He looked at me a long moment. "Because I can see it in your blood work from the intake form, and because of what I just saw on that screen, and what it told me about who you're married to." He pressed a card into my hand. "His personal cell. Call me tonight, please." Then he walked back toward the exam room and put his professional face back on like a coat. I want to tell you I understood right then. I didn't. I drove us home in a fog, Diane chattering about nursery colors, and I nodded and said all the right things while a cold little stone settled in my gut and refused to move. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without knowing how I got here. I met Diane at a grief support group. My wife Margaret had died of pancreatic cancer 2 years before, 18 months from diagnosis to the end, the worst 18 months of my life, and I'd spent the time after just existing. Going to the office, coming home to a house that echoed. Our daughter Katie called every Sunday and worried about me, but she lived 3 hours away in Cincinnati with her husband and her own life, and I didn't want to be the father who became a burden, so I went to the group. And there was Diane. She was 51 then, elegant in a way that made you sit up straight. She told the group she'd lost her husband, a man named Robert Vance, to a heart attack the year before. Sudden. Cruel. She talked about him with this quiet, dignified sorrow. And I remember thinking, here is someone who understands. Here is someone who knows what it is to lose the person you built your life around. We started getting coffee after meetings. Then dinner. Within a year, we were married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, and Katie flew in and hugged me and whispered, "I'm so happy you're happy, Dad." The first few years were good, I'll give them that. Diane was attentive, warm, a wonderful cook. She redecorated the house. Margaret's house, our house, and I let her. Because grief is a strange thing and a fresh coat of paint felt like permission to keep living. She handled a lot of the household money because I was tired of it, frankly, after a career of numbers. I just signed where she pointed. That should have been the first warning. I know that now. Then came the pregnancy. At 56, which the doctor said was rare but not impossible with intervention, and Diane had insisted on a fertility clinic, and I thought, why not? Let her have her miracle. Let me have mine. A second chance at the thing I'd given up, and about 6 weeks before that ultrasound, I'd started feeling sick. It came on slow, fatigue first, a bone-deep tiredness that no amount of sleep touched. Then the nausea. Then my hands started to tingle, And sometimes in the morning, my fingers wouldn't quite do what I told them. My handwriting got shaky. I attributed it to age, to stress, to the excitement. Diane was so attentive about it. That's the part that still makes my skin crawl. She'd bought me a daily vitamin regimen from a specialist, these capsules in an unmarked amber bottle she kept refilling. "For your heart, sweetheart," she'd say, handing me one with my morning coffee. "You need to be healthy now. You're going to be a daddy. This baby needs you around for a long, long time." And she'd watch me take it. Every morning, she'd watch me swallow it down. That night, after the doctor's appointment, I waited until she was in the shower, and I went into the bathroom cabinet and took 2 of those capsules and put them in my jacket pocket. Then I went down to the garage, sat in my car, and called Dr. Reyes. He picked up on the first ring. "I have them," I said. "Good. Bring them to my office tomorrow first thing. I have a friend at a private lab who owes me a favor. We'd know what they are within 48 hours. A pause. "Mr. Holloway, Frank, do you have somewhere else you can stay?" "It's my house." "I understand. But I want you to understand something too. The symptoms you described on your intake, the neuropathy, the fatigue, the gastrointestinal trouble. I've seen that pattern before, exactly once, early in my career. A man whose wife was poisoning him with thallium. It took us 9 months to figure it out, and by then it was too late." His voice was very steady. "I am not saying that is what this is. I'm saying I am not willing to wait 9 months to find out. And neither should you be." I sat in that dark garage with my hands gripping the wheel of a car that wasn't going anywhere, and I felt my whole life tilt on its axis. "Why?" I finally said. "Why would she? We have a baby coming." "Frank." His voice softened. "Whose baby do you think it is?" I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Diane and listened to her breathe and stared at the ceiling and ran the numbers, the way I'd run numbers my whole career. The life insurance. 8 months ago, she'd convinced me to update our policies for the new chapter. I'd signed where she pointed. I tried to remember the figure and couldn't. The house, fully paid off in both our names now. She'd handled that paperwork too, the refinance, the title change. My pension, my 401k, the brokerage account Margaret and I had built over 30 years. If I died, Diane got everything. And if I died with a baby on the way, she'd be the grieving widow and mother, untouchable beyond suspicion. But the baby, that was the piece that didn't fit. Unless, the next morning I dropped the capsules at Dr. Reyes' office on my way to work. I went through my whole day like a man underwater. And on my lunch hour, instead of eating, I drove to the storage unit where I kept the boxes I hadn't been able to throw away after Margaret. And where, I now remembered, Diane had asked me to store Robert's old things early in our marriage. His files. She'd said she couldn't bear to look at them, but couldn't throw them out. I'd never opened those boxes. Why would I? I opened them now. Robert Bance had been a careful man. There were tax returns, bank statements, a folder of medical records held together with a rubber band that had gone brittle and snapped when I touched it. I sat on the cold concrete floor of that storage unit and read about the last year of a dead man's life. He'd been to the doctor 11 times in his final 8 months. Fatigue, numbness in the extremities, digestive complaints, shaky hands. One note from a neurologist mentioned possible heavy metal exposure. Patient declined further testing per spouse's recommendation. Per spouse's recommendation. He died of a heart attack at 59. And there, clipped to the back of the folder, was the thing that turned the cold stone in my gut into something jagged, a life insurance payout statement. $1.2 million. Paid to Diane Vance, sole beneficiary, 4 months after his death. There was something else in the box too. A second folder, older, a man named Arthur Bell. Diane's first husband, she'd mentioned him once, in passing, said they'd divorced young. Except this folder said he hadn't divorced her. He died. Same symptoms. Same slow decline. A smaller payout, $400,000, but a payout all the same. 2 dead husbands. 2 slow declines. 2 insurance checks, and now me. I drove home that evening and I want to tell you I was full of rage, but mostly I was full of grief, because I'd loved her. Whatever she was, I'd loved the woman I thought she was, and that woman had never existed, and grieving someone who never existed is a particular kind of madness. That night, Dr. Reyes called. "It's thallium sulfate," he said. "High concentration in a capsule designed to look like a supplement. Frank, the dose you've been taking, based on your symptoms and the concentration, you've likely been ingesting it for 2, maybe 3 months. We caught it. Do you understand me? Another few weeks and we might not have. You need to be admitted tonight. There's a chelation treatment, Prussian blue, that binds to the thallium. The sooner we start, the better your recovery." "And the baby?" I asked. "On the ultrasound, what did you see?" He was quiet for a moment. "There was no baby, Frank. There never was. What I saw on that screen was a woman who has clearly never been pregnant, with the uterus consistent with a tubal ligation, a sterilization performed years ago. She's been faking it. The clinic visits, the fertility treatments, it's theater." I went back and looked. The clinic she named doesn't have her on file at all. I had to pull the car over. I'd been driving when I answered. "No baby." There was never a baby. The one true thing, the thing that had made me cry in a parking lot, the thing I've been clinging to for months while the woman beside me fed me poison and watched me swallow it. It had been a lie too. Maybe the biggest one. A pregnancy is a clock. It puts a deadline on a death. A grieving widow with a newborn is the most sympathetic figure on earth. She'd been counting on it. I checked into the hospital that night under a different name, with Dr. Race's help. I told Diane I was traveling for a client emergency in Cleveland. And then I did the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Harder than burying Margaret. I called my daughter. Katie drove up from Cincinnati at 6 the next morning. She walked into that hospital room and saw the IV in my arm and the gray in my face. And she put her hand over her mouth and started to cry, and I held her the way I had when she was small when the world had frightened her. "Daddy, what is happening?" So I told her. All of it. The capsules, the records, the 2 dead husbands, the baby that was never a baby. I expected her to fall apart. Instead, my daughter, who teaches 8th grade science, who has a spine of steel she gets from her mother, wiped her eyes and got very, very still. "Okay," she said. "Okay," she said. "We're not going to just divorce her, Dad. If we do that, she takes her money and she finds the next man, the next Robert, the next Arthur. She walks away clean and she does it again to somebody else's father." She took my hand. "We're going to make sure that never happens. But we have to be smarter than her. And we cannot let her know that you know. Not yet. I want to tell you about the next 11 days because they were the strangest of my life. I went home. I went back into that house and I kissed my wife on the cheek and I told her Cleveland had been exhausting. And I let her hand me my morning capsule. And I palmed it and pretended to swallow and dropped it into a coffee cup I emptied later. Every morning, I performed my own slow death for her while my body, in secret, got a little stronger from the treatment Dr. Reyes had started. It was the hardest acting I've ever done. I'd watch her at the breakfast table, planning baby names, rubbing a belly with nothing in it. And I'd think about Robert Vance reading his neurologist's note, declining the test, per spouse's recommendation, trusting the woman across the table the way I had. And something in me went very cold and very clear. Meanwhile, Katie worked. She quietly contacted a detective. Not the police, not yet. A private investigator, a retired sheriff's deputy named Walter Fall, who'd done work for her school district. We gave him the boxes. We gave him the lab report on the capsules, which Dr. Reyes had documented properly, chain of custody intact. We gave him the insurance records. And Ward found things we couldn't have. He found that Robert Vance and Arthur Bell weren't her only marriages. There'd been a third in Arizona decades back, a man who'd survived, who divorced her in a hurry and gotten a restraining order, and then refused to talk to anyone ever again. He found that the unmarked capsule bottle had been refilled from a compounding source she'd accessed under a false name. He found the thread, and once you have one thread, the whole thing unravels. The hardest part was the insurance, because I needed to know exactly how much my own death was worth to her, and I needed proof she'd arranged it. So one afternoon, while she was out at what she called a prenatal appointment, I went into her desk, the one drawer she always kept locked, the key to which I'd watched her hide 100 times without ever wondering why. $2 million. A term life policy on me, taken out 14 months earlier, with a rider sheet added 8 months ago, doubling the payout in case of accidental death or death during pregnancy. $2 million with her as sole beneficiary. And underneath it, a notebook, her handwriting, dosages, dates, a column of my symptoms tracked like a science experiment. The careful, patient record of a woman murdering her husband on a schedule. I photographed every page with my phone, the way Katie had told me to. Put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Locked the drawer. And then I went into the bathroom and was sick. Not from the poison this time, but from the simple human horror of it. We took everything to the police on the 12th day. I sat across from a detective named Sandra Pruitt, and I told her the whole story, and she listened without interrupting. And when I finished, she looked at the lab report and the notebook photographs and Walt's file, and she said very quietly, "Mr. Holloway, in 20 years I have rarely seen a case this well documented. Usually we're trying to dig the truth out of ashes. You handed it to us whole. They didn't arrest her at the house. Pruitt wanted more, wanted Diane on record, so they set up something I didn't fully understand at the time. But I knew my part. There was a dinner. Diane had been planning it for weeks. A celebration with a few of her friends and one of mine. A retirement and baby party, she called it, at a restaurant downtown. I understand now it was to be my last public appearance as a healthy man. She wanted witnesses to how vital I'd seemed right before my sudden tragic decline. The police let it go forward. I sat at the head of that table in a private room at a steakhouse, surrounded by candles and Diane's smiling friends, and I let her stand and tap her glass and give a speech about our love story, about second chances, about the family we were building. She was magnificent. She wept real tears. She talked about Robert, her poor first husband, taken too soon, and how she'd never imagined she'd be lucky enough to love again. And when she finished, I stood up. I'd written nothing down. I didn't need to. I'd been rehearsing it in my head for 11 days. I want to thank my wife, I said, for everything she's given me these past 5 years, for showing me a side of life I never expected to see again. I raised my glass, for the vitamins especially, the ones she's been so careful to give me every single morning. I watched her smile flicker, just slightly, just at the corner. I had them tested, Diane. The room went quiet. Thallium sulfate, I said. The same thing that killed Robert Vance and Arthur Bell before him. The same thing I imagine you tried on a man in Arizona before he was smart enough to run. I set the glass down. There's no baby. There never was. I've seen the medical records. So has Detective Pruitt, who, by the way, is sitting in a car outside this restaurant right now, along with 2 other officers, because everything I'm saying tonight is being recorded by the gentleman to your left, who is not actually my old colleague Gary, but a detective named Frank Okafor's nephew, and I'll admit I've lost track of who everyone really is anymore. Her friends were staring at her. One of them had set down her fork. Diane recovered fast. I'll give her that. The mask came off, and what was underneath was so calm, so utterly without warmth, that I finally understood I'd never once seen her real face in 5 years of marriage. "You're sick," she said softly. "You're confused. The thallium, it affects the mind, you know. Cognitive symptoms, paranoia." She turned to the table, voice trembling with manufactured fear. "He's not well. He's been declining for weeks. I've been so worried, Diane," I said. "The notebook is in your locked desk drawer. I photographed every page, your handwriting, my dosages." I watched the last of it drain out of her. You wrote it all down. You always was so organized. She stood up so fast her chair fell over, and Detective Pruitt was already in the doorway, because of course she'd been listening too, and there were officers behind her. And my wife of 5 years was arrested for attempted murder in the first degree in the private dining room of a steakhouse while 2 of her own friends watched with their hands over their mouths. The trial took 14 months. I won't pretend it was easy. The lab report, the notebook, the insurance riders, the storage unit records, Walt's investigation, the survivor in Arizona who finally agreed to testify by video, it built into something no jury could look away from. The exhumed Robert Vance. He'd been buried, not cremated, in a cemetery outside Dayton, and modern toxicology can find thallium in bone and hair years after death, which is exactly what it found. Arthur Bell's family, who'd always wondered, gave permission for the same. True cold cases reopened. 2 murders plus the attempt on me, plus fraud, plus identity charges going back decades. She was convicted on all counts. Life without the possibility of parole. I was in the courtroom for the verdict. Katie sat beside me and held my hand, and when the foreman read it out, I didn't feel the triumph I'd expected. I felt tired. I felt the weight of the years I'd lost, and the years Robert and Arthur never got, and I felt a quiet, exhausted relief that she would never sit across a breakfast table from another lonely man again. She turned and looked at me once as they led her out. I'd braced for hatred, but there was nothing in her face at all. That was the most frightening part. There had never been anything there. The doctors tell me I'll have some permanent nerve damage in my hands. My handwriting will never be what it was. Some mornings my fingers ache and don't quite cooperate, and I think of those capsules, and I think of how close I came. If Dr. Gray's hands hadn't started shaking at that ultrasound, if he'd been a less observant man, a more cautious one, the kind who minds his business and doesn't pull a stranger into a hallway, I would be in the ground next to Margaret right now, and Diane would be a wealthy widow shopping for husband number 5. I went to see him after the trial. I tried to thank him and couldn't get the words out. Just stood there in his office like a fool with my eyes full. He put a hand on my shoulder. "You'd have figured it out," he said. No, I told him I wouldn't have. Robert Vance didn't. Arthur Bell didn't. I was on the exact same road they were, signing where she pointed, taking my vitamins like a good husband. "You're the only reason I'm standing here." He shook his head. I just saw a screen with no baby on it, and a thing in my gut that wouldn't let go. The rest was you and your daughter. My daughter. I think about Katie a lot now, about how she didn't crumble, how she said we have to be smarter than her, how an 8th grade science teacher organized an investigation that put a serial murderer in prison for the rest of her life. I'd spent her whole childhood thinking my job was to protect her. It turned out, in the end, she was the one who saved me. I live alone now, in the house Margaret and I built. I had it repainted, back toward the colors it used to be. I see Katie and her husband more than I ever did before. Some good things grow out of bad ground. I'm 65. My hands shake. And every single morning when I make my coffee, I drink it black and I drink it alone. And I am so grateful for the bitterness of it, for the plain, ordinary truth of a cup of coffee that nobody handed me, that I sometimes have to sit down. If you take one thing from an old man's story, let it be this. The people who love you don't watch you swallow. They don't track your decline in a locked drawer. And if some part of you, some quiet animal part, starts whispering that something is wrong, the tiredness that won't lift, the kindness that feels a half degree too careful, don't sign where they point. Don't take the capsule. Ask the question. It cost 2 good men their lives to teach me that. I intend to spend whatever years I have left being worthy of the one who pulled me out of that hallway and the daughter who refused to let me drown. I keep Dr. Reyes's card in my wallet to this day. I never threw it out. Some debts you carry on purpose, so you don't forget what they cost. For 5 years I signed wherever Diane pointed. I told myself that was trust, that a good husband doesn't audit the woman he loves. But trust without attention isn't trust at all. It's surrender. and I surrendered the very things a grown man is supposed to keep his hands on. The accounts, the policies, the plain question of why my body was failing while the woman across the table smiled and refilled an unmarked bottle. Robert Vance surrendered the same way. So did Arthur Bell, two men, both gone, because they decided that loving someone meant never looking too closely. That's the cause, and the early grave is the effect, and there is nothing mystical about it. It's arithmetic. What saved me wasn't luck. Dr. Paulus made Reyes had spent 26 years refusing to look away from the thing in his gut that said something here is wrong, even when it would have been easier and safer to mind his business and send me home. That's character. The willingness to do the hard, awkward, costly right thing in a hallway when no one would have blamed you for staying quiet. I owe my life to a man who chose discomfort over silence. But character alone wouldn't have put Diane in a cell. That took my daughter. When Katie wiped her eyes and said we have to be smarter than her, she wasn't being cold. She was being clear-eyed in a moment that begged for panic. She understood that a divorce just sets the predator loose on the next lonely man, that the only real answer was patience, documentation, a locked drawer photographed page by page. Raw feeling would have tipped Diane off in a day. It was Katie's steadiness, her refusal to let grief make her stupid, that built the case detectives later said they rarely see handed to them whole. And then there was the hardest part, the part nobody could do for me. 11 mornings of palming a poison capsule and pretending to swallow it, kissing the woman who was killing me, performing my own slow death so we could catch her in the open. Every cell in my body wanted to run or to scream. I did neither. I held the line. Not because I'm brave, but because I'd finally decided that 2 dead men deserved a verdict, and I was the only one positioned to get it for them. I'm 65 now, with hands that shake and a quiet house I had repainted back to the way it used to be. If I could reach through this screen and press one thing into your chest, it would be this. Stay decent enough to refuse the easy silence. Stay sharp enough to ask the question when the kindness feels a half degree too careful. And stay sturdy enough to hold steady when the truth is ugly and the line is long. Decency, clarity, and a spine. Robert didn't get the chance to use all 3. I did. Don't waste yours.